Hi folks, we're at the Museum of Industry here in Stellarton, Nova Scotia. I'm Paul Kimball. I think you already know that. Now I know it too. I'm here with Andrew here at the Museum of Industry. Andrew's going to sort of tell us about the history of the museum, how it came to be, some of the exhibits that folks can see here. I usually save this for the end of the show. I'm just going to tell you folks straight up, this place is awesome. You can spend an entire day there. There's just so much to see and do. There's interactive displays. You might hear the voices of small children and pitter-patter of little feet behind us. The museum's open today. Folks are in enjoying it, which is amazing to see the kids' faces light up when they go, ooh, look how this works. But most importantly, two things. One, I never shut up. As my wife tells me, never shut up, but this is your moment. So strategically placed here, oatcakes. I will be quiet if I am eating oatcakes, which is also Maritime hospitality. Last season in Mulgrave, it was chocolate chip cookies. This season in Stellarton at the Museum of Industry, it's oatcakes, yum, yum, yum. So I'll be the oatcake monster. Tell me a bit about this wonderful museum, how it started, how long it's been here, what its genesis was, and some of the exhibits that folks can see when they come here.
Sure. So we've been open to the public here in Stellarton since 1995, and the planning and the building of the museum before that had gone on for about 15 years or so. So with studies and research and that kind of thing happening around a time when a lot of the early industries and mines and so on were shutting down, and a lot of that early development was beginning to change. So there was a desire really to preserve the knowledge and the artifacts related to our heritage. And so the focus of the museum really partly is around the development of mines, industries, factories, those kinds of things, the industrial technology, the arrival of steam power in the 1800s, and how that affected and changed the work that people do. But we also focus on the workers and their families and the people who contributed to the development, like May, our miner's wife, sitting right here at the table.
Hi, May.
Those
Thanks
families, yeah, that's right, yeah. So those families are a really important aspect of what we try to represent here. The people who were involved, worked in those factories and sought opportunities for themselves, entrepreneurs who created business opportunities and contributed to the economic growth and the development of the whole province.
So you've got all sorts of cool stuff. You've got a bus here that we'll talk about a little bit later. You have a hairstyling salon display, things about industry that maybe you wouldn't think about. You have an old television, you got an old Volvo. Actually, tell me about the Volvo.
Sure, the Volvo we have is a Volvo Canadian. The first car to come off the assembly line when Volvo was first opening up in Dartmouth in the 1960s.
That's the first
That's
one?
The very first, and we also have the last in our collection as well.
Are there any other things in the museum that really stand out to you? Like, what is your kind of personal? We don't want to make any of the exhibits feel bad, although they're inanimate objects. But which ones do you sort of go, wow, that one still makes me go, wow?
Yeah, I think I have to mention the Samson, one of the locomotive engines that we have in our collection, which is on our part of our permanent display here. And that is so special. It's really, I think, for me, the crown jewel of our collection, because it is the first coal-fired steam locomotive to operate in Canada, brought here to Nova Scotia to work the coal mines in the late 1830s. And so we're very fortunate that it has survived all that time. It was recognized even in the 1800s as a significant artifact at that time. And that's why I think, to a large part, it's still in existence with us here today.
This is one of the things that attracted my attention as soon as I came in, because I love dioramas. I think they're great ways of showing history, but also making history interesting for folks, sort of traveling back in a TARDIS to the past and seeing this actually in action. Tell me a bit about the diorama, the story that it's sort of trying to tell, and a bit about how it works, although I think I know what this button might be involved in that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Okay. So our diorama here is really looking at how important the development of railroads were for Nova Scotia in its own economic development. So starting back really in the 1820s and 30s, the first short railroads were being built here. Some of the first are right here in Stellarton,
Right.
to connect the coal mines to the loading piers out towards Pictou Harbour. And things expanded from there through the rest of the 1800s. So eventually not only small communities and industries were being linked together in the province, but we were also being connected with the other colonies at that time across Canada, and eventually in the 1880s all the way out to British Columbia.
I was going to ask what some of the things are, but first, this is my Lex Luthor moment, where I put everything in motion. So I assume if I push this,
Go right
some
ahead.
of the trains are going to
That's
go.
right.
I'm referring to Superman Returns there, which is the lesser-known Superman. There we go. Oh, look at that. There will be no kryptonite jungle coming up from this for folks who have seen Superman Returns. But yeah, okay. I used to have model trains as a kid, so this is much more intricate than what I had.
Right,
But,
yes.
You can sort of choo-choo, the trains come around. So we have, so what do we have, a little town? How does this play out? What's the story here?
So the story really is, again, about how important railroads were in connecting together both communities and different industries. So right in front of us here, we have a steel mill similar to what you would see in Sydney, for example. Coal mine up on the hill, a little bit farther back in the diorama, a port with ships coming into it.
I didn't see that before.
Yeah,
I see
that's right.
the mass of the ship going up there.
So again, emphasizing how important it was for this kind of transportation network
Right.
for the development of industry.
So what is the little fire?
The little fire,
Which is
actually.
right in
Yeah.
there.
There's lots of little details here that our visitors can pick out. That's actually somebody, I think, operating a still back up in the woods, making a little bit of moonshine, perhaps.
Museum of a different kind of industry.
right, yeah.
So that also, I joke, but is an integral part of maritime history.
Entrepreneurship.
Yes,
That's right.
at its very finest. My mom's family's from the Miramichi, and yeah, you're shaking your head. I mean,
Yes.
anyone who knows the Miramichi, there might have been a few stills there in the backwoods. There might still be a few. So making moonshine or whatever it is they're making. And the other thing about maritime history too is when the Americans had prohibition, boo, lots of folks here made a fair amount of money.
That's right.
Rum running, which because we didn't have prohibition, but the idea that we would ship down to the New England states, and there was that back and forth trade. But then you can also look at the other side, the temperance movement.
That's right.
So I want to give credit to the people who said this is all bad.
Yeah.
That was a key part of 19th century religious history here in the churches, and carried on into the 20th century as well. The idea of banning alcohol or at least tempering it down. So there's all these little things that you can see happening. The still is I couldn't see, but a still, I like that. It's the best part about a diorama. There's a little cemetery there.
Yep, there is a wedding going on at the church.
Oh, okay.
Some laundry being hung out, I think, behind one of the houses here as well.
Right. So this is how the community, people on horses, a couple of guys sitting around chatting, shooting the
right.
breeze.
Yep.
Hey, Bill, did you see what's going on up at the moonshine still?
Yeah.
Shh, we don't talk about that in front of management. So yeah, this is just really cool. Love it, love it, love it. The funny thing was there were a couple of guys who wanted to do you could never get a girl, I don't think, in industrial arts, but there were always a couple of guys who wanted to go do home economics. I'm like, why do you want to do? Because that's where all the girls are. And here we are through the magic of space and time, traveling through my TARDIS. One of these days, I'm actually going to show the TARDIS on camera, but not today. We're here at the glass exhibit. Now, I always tell folks when they come to a museum, especially one as big and intricate and with so many exhibits as this one, you could walk through and I could walk through together, and you will see maybe your top three things would be different from my top three things. Like you'd be going, ooh, look at that and that, and I'd be like, ooh, look at this and this. So my wife and I, when we go to museums, I just know what would happen if we came to this. So honey, this one's for you. She would come to the glass exhibit. Now I like it too. This is kind of awesome. But she would just like, boom, can we buy all this?
Right,
I'd be
yes.
like, no, I think there's a reason it's behind these partitions. But tell me a bit about the Nova Scotia Glass Company and this exhibit here, because there's some really beautiful stuff, and it's sort of one of those things that people forget about in Nova Scotia, but we're sort of well known for glass.
Yeah, that's right. So the Nova Scotia Glass Company produced what we call today quite often Trenton Glass. The factory was located in Trenton, and it was called pressed glassware. So you would take a lump of molten glass and you would press it into a mold, and that would give you your final shape.
Right.
And so they were producing glassware for export really to central Canada.
Okay.
And it was meant to be kind of cheap and decorative, attractive tableware for everyday use.
Oh, hold on now. Cheap?
Yes, that's right.
Now, yes, honey. Forget everything I just said. I will get some of this glassware.
Yeah.
Now it wouldn't be considered so cheap. It
That's
would be sort of rare and kind of antique, basically.
Yeah, that's right. It was only produced in Nova Scotia for about 11, 12 years or so.
Oh, wow.
And so what was produced here is fairly rare. And if you were to buy one of these goblets in an antique shop, depending on the quality, it might be between $150 to $250 a piece.
Which I'm guessing the original folks were not paying for one of the goblets.
No, that's right, yeah.
So yeah, everything, it's kind of lets you in on some of the things that I remember when I was a kid, comic books. My father thought, why are you buying these comic books? Well, I just wanted to read them. If I had stuck some of those in a plastic bag and kept them for 40 years, some of them would actually be things that you don't think will be worth money, might actually...
They gain value as they become more rare.
Yes, that's what I tell people on every birthday. I gain value as I become older and more rare. All right, yet again, through the magic of time and space, I get paid every time I say that, folks. We are in the Shopmobile, which is actually really cool and would make it an interesting TARDIS. There are things in here. I took industrial arts when I was a kid, in junior high school. I was banned from using most of these instruments, which I might do a video for the interweb thing where I tell that story. But so these to me are death traps. But I do know what all of these are for once. But I don't know what the Shopmobile was in particular. So what was, I know a bookmobile, I'd go and I'd borrow books. What was the Shopmobile's purpose?
Well, it was a traveling classroom offering what they would call industrial arts or manual training in the past, tech ed today. The driver was also the teacher. And there were a number of these buses that operated in the rural school boards around Nova Scotia in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s for the most part. So you would drive the bus around to a little rural junior high or high school. Boys only at that time would get on board for their class. Sometimes you would drive around to another school and do a couple school worths of boys all together. And so the driver would teach wood and metal shop and using the tools and the power equipment.
It was a very different era, even when I went to junior high school, which was in the 70s, I guess, or very early 80s. It was industrial arts for the guys, or shop, and we had wood and metal shop. And for the girls, it was home economics, which was basically cooking and sewing, I think. And to think about that now, in 2021, and go back into my lifetime, it was like, that is a sort of a massive cultural change that we have lived through that you don't actually sometimes really think about it. The funny thing was there were a couple of guys who wanted to do home, you could never get a girl, I don't think, in industrial arts, but there were always a couple of guys who wanted to go do home economics. I'm like, why do you want to do? Because that's where all the girls are. They're all in the same place. So, so yeah, this is now, this one, is that a lathe?
Drill press.
Drill press.
That's right.
This is why all I was allowed to do was cut rebar and make dice. At the end, folks, that's really all I was allowed to do. But as we go back, you see some, I'll do my little spinaroo here. You see some of the, so there's a saw, which that's probably what I was making the dice with, because it would saw metal. That is a bandsaw.
That's a bandsaw.
Yes, I definitely know that that's a bandsaw. This is, what would this be?
That's a good question, actually. I was going to say it was a jigsaw.
Actually, yeah, that might be. This is why you would have probably a crusty old guy.
That's right.
If he's anything like my shop teacher. Mr. Wilson, we showed up in grade 7, and he said he had a jacket on and had Tug, because he'd been in the Navy, I think. So that was his nickname. And he stood in front of the class. We're all fresh to junior high school, too. And he goes, all right, you can call me one of two things. You can call me Mr. Wilson, or you can call me by my nickname. We're like, oh, wow. Like, this guy's going to let us call him Tug. This is awesome. What a friendly fellow. He said, here, I'll write it on the board for you. And he picked up a piece of chalk and he wrote S-I-R. And we immediately went, well, it's got 3 letters. Right. It's not Tug. Yes, sir. So totally different journey than the one we for 10 seconds had planned. So kids would have come in here. They would learn how to do stuff that actually many of them might have gone on to do as their jobs. They're living their trades.
Yep, that's right. Yeah.
Well, traveling around, this would be kind of fun. You'd be like the littlest hobo of industrial arts, traveling around to the rural schools of Nova Scotia and say, come on in, kids, I'm going to teach you how to use a bandsaw or whatever you are. Cool. Well, this is awesome. It's amazing. Where did the bus come from? I assume this is an original. Is it?
Yeah, it is an original and was restored again around the time.
Was that it?
I think if that's not the same one, it was in similar condition.
So this underwent a full restoration,
That's
everything
right.
to bring it back up to where it would have been.
That's right.
Back then. Okay, amazing exhibit. Well, thank you very much, Andrew, for taking me through all of this. I think I'm going to transition from you to Paul, another Paul, to talk about coal mining. You know, it's amazing to meet folks like you that have such a passion for the museums that they work at, and for letting us sort of share some of that with the folks at home, but also to get an idea of what all this stuff is. This is actually really cool. Bookmobiles for me, shopmobile in New Glasgow.
There are brickyards, lumber yard, and other ancillary industries. So,
All meant to service the coal industry.
all meant to service the coal industry.
All right, folks, we're back. 2 Pauls for the price of 1. So I'm Paul. This is Paul Lalonde, and we're here to talk about the history of coal mining in this region. This area is known for a lot of things. Apparently, pizza, great pizza too. So I will be talking about that later tonight with my crew. But coal mining, I think, if you were to mention Stellarton, Westville, Trenton, New Glasgow, this area, most Nova Scotians might hearken back to coal mining. For good and ill, there's tragedy, but there's also great stories of how communities were built and solidarity and fellowship and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely. The whole area was economically dependent for a long time on the coal mining. A town like Westville, for instance, at one time was quite a growing metropolis. 2 hotels, a first indoor skating rink east of Montreal.
Really?
5 coal mines over the period of years in that coal mine. One of the largest in Nova Scotia. The Drummond stayed open for 124 years.
Wow, so this was that coal mining and all the ancillary associated industries and that went with it was the economic driver of this region for over a century then.
Oh, absolutely. Right here in this grounds, the Ford pit was right here. And in back of the Ford pit behind us, there was a major foundry. There were brickyards, lumber yard, and other ancillary industries. So,
all meant to service the coal industry.
All meant to service the coal industry.
So you were telling me a story that kind of illustrates how hard the life could be. And this is sort of, to me, the bit of the triumph, too, because these folks went down into the mines, very hard life, very dangerous work, but also that they could, provide for their families and hopefully create a better life for their children, for the next generation. But you were telling me about a guy who went to medical school, who might have done a day or so in the mining industry. The ringing of the bell, folks, it's story time on Maritime Museums. So tell me that story, because I quite like it, actually. It sort of is funny, but it illustrates just how sort of tough this business was.
Well, up here in our gallery called Coal and Grit, there is a coal box. miners were expected to fill that 25 times in a 12-hour shift. I came up into the gallery one day, and there was just a tiny little gentleman, I would say in his mid-80s, and he was looking at the box, and as I approached him, he let out a sigh, and instead of introducing myself and so forth, I said, "Sir, this seems to mean something to you," looking at the coal box. And he looked at it, and then he looked at me, and he said, "You know, now that you mention it, one of these made me a doctor." And of course, that intrigued me, so I asked him what he meant by that, and he said he was 13 years old living in Westville, and all his friends were quitting school and running up to one of the coal mines, because there were a couple of coal mines in Westville at that time, and they were quitting school to get a job, and he didn't want to be left out, so he quit as well, went up to the mine, and the job they gave him was to lead a trip. That's a horse pulling 4, 5, 6 coal cars through the mine to the last ventilation door, or trapper door, to the main line where it would be hooked onto the chains to be hauled to the surface by the steam engine. Well, anyway, the one he gave him was a particular horse. When he got about 60 or 70 feet away from the last ventilation door, that horse wanted to run. There was a little bit of an upswing just before the trapper door, so he would hop on the front of the 2 projections at the front of the coal box, and as it got closer, this horse running, pulling hard, his job was to pull the pin. The horse raced down one tunnel. The cart kept going straight forward, and he would scream at the top of his lungs, "Open the doors, open the doors." The trapper door opened at the last second. He said, "Oh, I did that for 3 days. I was so terrified, I quit, went back to school, eventually became a doctor."
Became a doctor. So there you go. That's one of those happy-go-lucky stories of, took a look into the abyss and went, "No, not for me. One of these days they're not going to open that door, and it might not end well." When we were talking to Andrew earlier, he said, they would get people come in here and said, "We lived here in these mining towns, and sure, it was rough, but we have nothing but fond memories of the life within the town."
That can't be overstated. The men loved the mines in many ways. They loved the camaraderie.
Teamwork, fellowship.
Oh, absolutely. As one fellow said in one of the commentaries here, we worked hard, but we played hard too.
Okay, sounds like a film crew, boys. Actually, it doesn't sound like a film crew at all. Well, thank you very much, Paul. And thanks to everybody here at the Museum of Industry, Denise and Andrew and everybody else who has facilitated our visit here today. If you come here, and I can't recommend enough that folks do, this is a wonderful trip through time, the history of our province, our people. In what is industry? It's people that lived lives, created jobs, built things that went out to the rest of the world, had good and had bad, happened to them. That's life. And you can see it all here in Stellarton at the Museum of Industry.
Wonderfully said.
Well, there you go, Mom. See, I got that one right. Now all I have to do is get my hair cut and she'll be perfectly happy.